It all started with a faint, lingering scent of diesel. The kind of smell that clings to the air, subtle but unmistakable. I stepped outside, the crisp morning breeze brushing against my face, and immediately knew something was wrong. The sky was clear, the birds were chirping, but my gut twisted into a knot. Something was off. I hurried to my tractor, my boots crunching against the gravel driveway. The fuel cap was loose. I yanked it open, and my heart sank. Empty. Bone dry. Again. This wasn't just about fuel. This was personal. My land, my property, my damn fuel. Someone had been sneaking onto my property under the cover of darkness, siphoning my fuel like I was some clueless idiot. And this wasn't the first time. It was the third time in 2 months. Whoever it was, they were bold and they were about to regret it. I stomped back inside, my mind racing. My dog, Max, lifted his head lazily from the couch, giving me a look that said, "Well, you gonna do something about it?" I scratched my beard, staring out the window. I needed proof. I needed to catch the lowlife who thought they could just waltz onto my property and take what wasn't theirs. And I had a pretty good idea of where to start. The name alone made my eye twitch. Margaret, the self-appointed queen of the homeowners association, the tyrant of the cul-de-sac, the walking, talking migraine of our neighborhood. She was the kind of woman who handed out violation notices like they were candy, reported people for minor infractions like Leah vying their trash cans out a few minutes too long, and had once threatened to call the cops because someone put up Christmas lights before Thanksgiving. And now, after seeing her SUV parked in the communal lot for weeks without moving, I had a sneaking suspicion she'd been helping herself to a little free fuel. I wasn't about to accuse her outright, not yet, anyway. No, I needed undeniable, rock-solid proof. So, I did what any rational, slightly vengeful homeowner would do. I set up a hidden camera. That night, under the cover of darkness, I installed a small motion-activated camera near my fuel tank. I angled it just right, making sure it covered the area where someone would have to stand to siphon the fuel. Then I waited. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, a strange excitement bubbling in my chest as I rushed to check the footage. I scrolled through the recording, watching in disbelief as the camera caught every last detail in crisp, glorious HD. There she was, Margaret, in the dead of night, creeping up to my tractor like some kind of suburban gas bandit, a red plastic fuel canister in hand. She moved quickly, looking over her shoulder every few seconds like a cartoon VY lane, unscrewing the cap and sticking in a siphon hose with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before. I sat back, stunned, as I watched her fill her canister, cap it, and tiptoe back toward the street. I should have been mad. I should have stormed over there and given her a piece of my mind. But instead, I laughed. Because honestly, the sheer audacity. The president of the HOA, the woman who preached about rules and regulations, the one who scolded people for Leah vying their porch lights on too late, she was the one sneaking around at night, stealing fuel like some desperate outlaw in a post-apocalyptic MOVYE. I knew I couldn't let this slide. But if Margaret wanted to play dirty, I'd play dirtier. Later that day, I saw her watering her front lawn, all prim and proper, dressed in one of those stiff beige cardigans she always wore. I strolled over, hands in my pockets, keeping my expression neutral. "Hey, Margaret," I said casually. She turned, smiling that fake, tight-lipped smile. "Oh, hello, Jake. How can I help you?" I pretended to scratch my head, glancing toward the communal lot. "You heard about the thefts around here?" Her expression didn't change, but I noticed a slight shift in her posture. "Thefts?" she echoed, feigning innocence. "Yeah," I said. "Someone's been sneaking onto properties, taking stuff that ain't theirs. Real shame. Seems like the kind of thing an HOA president would want to crack down on, huh?" She pursed her lips, tilting her head slightly. "Well, I suppose that's concerning. I'll have to bring it up at the next meeting." I gave her a slow nod, my gaze locking onto hers just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Yeah, you do that." And then I walked away. I didn't call her out. I didn't throw the footage in her face. Not yet. I wanted her to sweat, to feel the paranoia creep up her spine. She didn't know what I knew, and that, my friends, was power. But I wasn't done yet. No, I had something even better in mind. A few hours later, as I walked past the communal lot, my eyes landed on her SUV, big, black, gas-guzzling beast that had been sitting there for weeks, untouched. An idea sparked in my head, something so fitting, so beautifully ironic, that I almost laughed out loud. I pulled out my phone and dialed the city's non-emergency line. "Yeah, hi," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I'd like to report an abandoned vehicle. Been sitting in our lot for weeks, hasn't moved. Probably taking up space someone else could use." The operator asked me a few details: make, model, location, and I fed them the information with a smug grin. Oh, and it might be violating HOA rules too. I know how strict those guys can be. By the time I hung up, I had to bite my cheek to keep from laughing. Margaret wanted to take from me? Well, let's see how she liked having something of hers taken instead. That evening, as I sat on my porch sipping a well-earned beer, I glanced toward her house. Margaret was inside, blissfully unaware of the chaos that was about to unfold. Tomorrow, her car was getting towed, and I couldn't wait to see the look on her face. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, anticipation buzzing in my chest like a live wire. I knew today was going to be interesting, and I didn't want to miss a second of it. I made myself a strong cup of coffee, stepped out onto my porch, and waited. The neighborhood was still quiet, the air crisp with the lingering chill of the early hours. Birds chirped, the occasional car passed by, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. But I knew better. I knew that peace wouldn't last. At exactly 9:30, the tow truck rolled into the communal parking lot, its engine a deep, throaty growl that echoed through the neighborhood. I took a slow sip of my coffee, eyes locked on the scene unfolding in front of me. The truck driver, a burly guy with a no-nonsense expression, stepped out and walked toward Margaret's SUV. He gave it a once-over, then pulled out his clipboard, making a few notes before heading back to his truck. Right on cue, the front door of Margaret's house flew open. She came storming out in a panic, her robe barely tied, her hair a mess, as if she had just realized her world was about to crumble. Her slippers slapped against the pavement as she half ran, half marched toward the tow truck, arms flailing. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" Her voice, sharp and shrill, cut through the quiet morning air like a siren. The driver barely glanced at her. "Vehicle's been reported as abandoned. Orders from the city," he said, unfazed. He leaned against his truck. Chewing gum like this was just another routine job. Margaret's face went from red to purple in record time. "Abandoned? That is my car. Who reported this?" The driver shrugged, clearly uninterested in entertaining her tantrum. "Dunno, lady. Could have been anyone. Rules say a car can't sit for weeks in a communal lot without movement. Yours has been here way longer than the limit." I leaned back in my chair, suppressing a chuckle. This was already better than I imagined. Margaret sputtered, searching for a response, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, predictably, she tried the magic words that had worked for her so many times before. "I'm the HOA president." The tow truck driver didn't even blink. "Cool. Still getting towed." Margaret's jaw nearly unhinged. "You can't do that. This is private property." The driver lazily pointed to the sign nearby. "Nope. This is a city-monitored lot. HOA rules don't override city regulations." I nearly spit out my coffee. That one hit her hard. She took a step back, momentarily stunned, before regaining her composure. "I'll have this reversed immediately," she huffed, crossing her arms. "I have connections." The driver just nodded, not looking the least bit concerned. "Sure thing, lady. Call whoever you want." Car's still Leah vying. She let out a noise somewhere between a growl and a screech, her hands balled into fists. But she knew she couldn't physically stop them. She turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, muttering something about making phone calls. I decided now was the perfect time to make my presence known. I stretched my arms, set my coffee cup down, and strolled toward the scene like I was just casually out for some fresh air. "Tough morning, Margaret?" I asked, keeping my tone light and friendly. Her head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting its prey. "You," she hissed. "You did this." I raised an eyebrow. "Me? Now, why would I report your car? You're the one who always talks about following the rules, aren't you? And well, the rules say cars can't just sit around abandoned." She stared at me, her jaw tight, nostrils flaring. I could see the wheels turning in her head, but she had no proof. She couldn't just accuse me without something concrete. And she knew it. Instead, she turned her fury back to the tow truck driver, who had already begun securing her SUV to the truck. This is absolutely unacceptable. I will be filing a formal complaint against the city, against this towing company, and against whoever falsely reported this. The driver just chuckled. Go for it, lady. Car's still Leah VYing. Margaret was practically VY bratting with rage as she watched her precious SUV get lifted off the ground. I couldn't help but enjoy the moment, especially when she stomped her foot like an angry child. Just then, a few of the other neighbors started peeking out their windows, some even stepping outside to see what all the commotion was about. Margaret's humiliation was growing by the second, and she knew it. She was used to being the one in control, the one dictating the rules and enforcing fines. But now, the tables had turned. As the tow truck began pulling away, Margaret let out a dramatic gasp, as if watching a loved one being taken away against their will. She turned back to me, her expression pure venom. You think this is funny? She snapped. I shrugged. Little bit. You're going to regret this, she warned. Not as much as you're going to regret stealing my fuel. I shot back, my grin widening. She froze. It was only for a split second, but I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes, the way her breath hitched. She knew. She knew I knew. And that made this moment even better. Instead of responding, she spun around and stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I chuckled to myself as I walked back to my porch, savoring the small VY Tory. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from my buddy, Tom, who lived a few houses down. Dude, did you just get Margaret's car towed? I smirked and typed back, not my fault she broke the rules. Another message came in. I owe you a beer. I leaned back in my chair, feeling more satisfied than I had in a long time. Margaret had spent years making everyone else's lives miserable with her ridiculous HOA nonsense. But today, she'd finally gotten a taste of her own medicine. And the best part? I wasn't even done with her yet. The fallout from Margaret's car being towed was immediate and delicious. By midday, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. Margaret, the once untouchable HOA queen, had been humiliated in front of everyone. Her SUV, her symbol of suburban dominance, was gone, and she had no one to blame but herself. But Margaret wasn't one to go down without a fight. She spent the rest of the day making phone calls, trying to get her car back and salvage what was left of her dignity. She even called the mayor's office, demanding that the city reverse the towing order. But the city wasn't budging. Rules were rules, and Margaret had broken them. Meanwhile, I sat back and enjoyed the show. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from neighbors, all of them thanking me for taking Margaret down a peg. Even Tom, who usually avoided conflict, sent me a text that read, "You're a legend, man." But I knew this wasn't over. Margaret was too proud, too stubborn to let this go. She would retaliate, and I needed to be ready. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of pounding on my front door. I opened it to find Margaret standing there, her face red with rage, clutching a stack of papers. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she spat, thrusting the papers at me. "Well, enjoy these." I filed a formal complaint with the HOA. You're in violation of at least a dozen rules. I took the papers, glancing through them. Most of the violations were ridiculous things like unauthorized lawn ornamentation and improperly stored garden tools. But one caught my eye: illegal surveillance. I raised an eyebrow. Illegal surveillance? Really, Margaret? She crossed her arms, a smug smile on her face. That's right. You installed a camera without HOA approval. That's a clear violation of privacy rules. I chuckled. First of all, my property isn't part of the HOA. Second, even if it was, I have every right to protect my land from thieves. Her smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. We'll see about that. I've already scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for tonight. Be there, or face the consequences. She turned on her heel and marched away, Leah VYing me standing there with the stack of papers. I shook my head, a grin spreading across my face. Margaret was desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. This was going to be fun. That evening, I arrived at the community center for the HOA meeting. The room was packed, every seat filled with neighbors eager to see how this would play out. Margaret stood at the front of the room, her usual beige cardigan replaced with a sharp blazer, as if she were preparing for battle. The meeting started with the usual formalities: But it didn't take long for Margaret to get to the point. As you all know, she began, her voice dripping with faux concern, there have been some troubling incidents in our neighborhood recently. Theft, vandalism, and now illegal surveillance. She shot me a pointed look, and I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, waiting for her to continue. I filed a formal complaint against Jake for multiple HOA violations, she said, holding up the stack of papers. And I urged the board to take immediate action. The room erupted in murmurs. Some people looked concerned, while others seemed skeptical. I stood up, holding up my hand to silence the crowd. Before we jump to conclusions, I said, I'd like to show you all something. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the projector. The room fell silent as the footage of Margaret siphoning fuel from my tractor played on the screen. Her face was clear as day, her actions unmistakable. The room erupted in gasps. Margaret's face turned pale, then red with rage. That's doctored, she stammered. This is a setup. I shook my head. It's not doctored, Margaret. It's clear as day. You've been stealing from me and probably from others too. The room erupted again, this time with anger. People started shouting, demanding answers. Margaret tried to regain control, but it was too late. The evidence was undeniable. The meeting ended in chaos. Margaret was stripped of her position as HOA president, and the board voted to investigate her for theft and misuse of HOA funds. It turned out she had been using her position to cover up her own violations for years. A few weeks later, Margaret's house went up for sale. She moved out quietly, without a word to anyone. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. The reign of Margaret was over. With Margaret gone, the neighborhood changed almost overnight. The HOA meetings became more relaxed, and people started decorating their yards without fear of fines. Someone even put up a giant inflatable flamingo, a blatant middle finger to Margaret's strict rules. I sat on my porch one evening, sipping a beer and enjoying the newfound peace. Tom walked by, holding a six-pack. He tossed me a beer and raised his in a toast. To you, man, he said. You saved this neighborhood. I chuckled and clinked my bottle against his. Nah, I just followed the rules. And as the sun set, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, I couldn't help but smile. The fuel thief was gone, and life was finally good. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.